Evening, it's 6 o'clock and I know how Bill operates. If we start on time and we finish on time. So I will start, and my name is Chuck Ellinger. I am one of your 3 at-large council members. There's 12 districts and 3 at-large, 15 on the council. I'd like to start by just recognizing some of the council members are here. Dave Savigny, who is the 10th district representative, and Lee Sheehan is our 5th district. So thank you all for being here. I know the vice mayor, I just saw he is on Zoom, and I want to thank you all for allowing that, because for people who can't be here, they can at least watch us. And also there will be a replay that, if I know council members said that they have conflict with both. I know Councilmember Reynolds is leading a task force right now on gun violence, and Councilmember Shayla Lynch is going to be there. James Brown is supposed to be on his way, and he's supposed to be here, one of our at-large. Hannah LaGree is on her way. She's our 3rd district representative. Here comes on cue. Here comes Hannah. Welcome, Hannah. And Hannah, if you all are concerned about Phoenix Park, Hannah is working on doing that. So see her afterwards. She's out helping us redo Phoenix Park. So I always try to put a plug in for that. Let's see who else is. Whitney Baxter is on Zoom right now. And I know a couple others weren't able, like I said, to be here, but I want to thank everybody who is here. Bill, you all do a great job. I always say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you all do your homework, and then you all advocate. You advocate well. We have affordable housing fund right now because of you all. There wouldn't be a reason we had that without your all's work. 2014 we started because of you all, and now we just add. And if Councilmember Brown was here, I would give him a little shout out, because we just did a 1% for our revenues for our budget. That now is going to be doubling the amount that we're going to be putting annually into affordable housing. And you all were the reason why the council did that. It takes 8 votes to get anything done on the council. So we always have to make sure we get those 8 votes. We're here tonight to talk about public transportation. I do have one person Fred Cohn from Lexington is here. Where's Fred? I really appreciate you coming out here. And I know Emily Elliott, who's also with Lexington, I saw was on Zoom too. So thank you all for being here and coming and listen about public transit and micro transit. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm looking forward to the discussion. We have Thea that's going to be here talking. I always mispronounce your name, so I'm not going to even attempt to source, because I always do it wrong, but I think I got close that time, didn't I? I mean, mine is Ellinger, but my mom says Ellinger, my sister says Ellinger, so nobody gets it right in their own family. So I have a hard time with names sometimes, but I have 3 minutes. I could have got 5 minutes. I said I only need 3, so I should have taken the other 2. How many took the bus down here to get here tonight? Anybody take the bus to get out here? I actually took the bus down here. I take the 5 from Nicholsville Road and walk from the transit center. We have a great bus system, especially if you're on the corridors, but some of the issues we might have is trying to fill in those gaps if you have to walk a mile to get to a bus stop. And I'll thank Lexington. If you look at we've got it in their big and I don't know how you would say their proposal or what they look at, and it's their mobility of demand, their action plan, and that's in there. And that's similar to what we're talking about, micro transit. So they have discussed it. We just want to have a little more discussion and work with Lexington, because they're the ones who provide it. And I really want to thank you all for being here and listening to what the people have to say. So with that, I think my 3 minutes is up, and I will move forward. And Adam, we'll let you do the introduction so I don't mess up his name again. So thank you.
Well done, Councilman. Over 3 minutes. Hope I can be settled. Good evening. My name is Adam Jones. I'm the pastor of Open Door Church, and I'm also on the transportation committee for Build. I'm here tonight as a community member who has seen and felt the issues that are affecting many of our neighbors around transportation. I'll tell you one story. In May, there was a woman named Delia that came to our church. She was homeless. She got an apartment. We helped her move into that apartment, which was awesome. She got a job. It was at the Aramark factory on Versailles Road. Her apartment was way up Richmond Road. She had to be at work at 5 a.m. and there wasn't a bus route. So she walked from Richmond Road to Versailles Road, which is a long way. She just didn't have a choice at that time. She didn't have the money for a cab or other services at that time. Folks like Delia, her story is just one piece of a larger problem in Lexington. And many in our community grapple with the limitations that our current transportation system provides. The fact that we're all here tonight shows that the challenges aren't isolated. We know many of you from various organizations have stories too. At Build, we know that when we share our stories and our experiences, we can see how they connect to larger problems in our city. That's where our story with this issue began in 2021. Initially, we just entered the season of listening, and we heard a lot of stories about the mental health crisis in Lexington and about folks having trouble. And we knew we had to do something, and so we started looking into the mental health crisis. We talked to people we knew, and we heard the story of Dallas, who's also a member at Open Door. He had struggled to manage his mental illness because he consistently had trouble getting to his doctor for his shot. He's gone off his medication multiple times, and he's shared this publicly, so I'm not disclosing anything that's new. Because he couldn't find a ride, or his ride didn't show. Hearing stories like Dallas made us look closer at the problem of transportation. We met with New Vista, our community mental health care provider, and they shared that transportation is one of the most significant barriers to their clients receiving care. The barriers we've heard over and over again are accessibility and efficiency, which Councilmember Ellinger alluded to, I believe. Many people in our city, like Dallas, live outside the bounds of our public transportation for one reason or another. They're in the gaps. Others can't even rely on the bus to get to work in the morning because, like I said with Delia, it just doesn't run during their shift or won't get them there early enough. Still others, due to physical or mental disabilities, face unique challenges with getting around town. To accommodate these specific challenges, Lextran does offer the paratransit service called Wheels to those with ADA recognized disabilities who qualify. However, this only sometimes meets the need. My friend James from Open Door also uses Wheels. I've had to pick him up from dialysis because dialysis wears him out. And one day he had to wait 3 hours, and he called me and asked me to come and get him. We all know that life doesn't always go 24 hours in advance, right? Well, with Wheels, which is a helpful service to many, you do have to call 24 hours in advance. The limitation of that is if you have an emergency, or you just want to go visit a friend or go to a park. Some of our folks don't want to go through the hassle. And in an emergency, you can't always plan 24 hours in advance. Life goes on, and so the people in our community either deal with the limitations that they face, or they find another way to get where they go. In our church, it's often calling me or someone in our church to get a ride. We also heard from a pastor who's very familiar with this reality. He shared with us that he serves many undocumented immigrants who drive without a license every day because the bus system doesn't work for them. It doesn't work on the hours that they need. Some live too far from public transportation, and others can't take the bus because they need to get to work at a certain time and the bus doesn't get them there. So they risk getting pulled over in a car and possibly deported because they need to provide for their family. I do want to say, we do appreciate the service that Lextran provides for our city. We know that Lextran, because we've spoken with them many times, we know that they are always working to improve their ability to serve our community. And we know that Wheels is part of that effort. We recognize that. However, the stories we've shared tonight continue to highlight the fact that there are limitations to our current transportation system, and there are still gaps that need to be filled. It will take a collective effort from our community stakeholders, policymakers, and other stakeholders to create a more inclusive and flexible transportation system that serves all of our neighbors, which brings us to our meeting tonight. Perhaps you're here because you face some of the challenges that I mentioned. Perhaps you're here as a council member, because you're just interested in making Lexington better, which we appreciate. Regardless of the reasons for joining us this evening, we hope you recognize how all segments of our community and our city share these experiences with public transportation, and they are rooted in the same fundamental problem. We hope that after our next presentation, you see that it doesn't have to be this way forever, and we're excited about that. We don't have to kick this issue down the road because there are solutions we can look at now, and we are excited about those solutions that we have now. With that, I would like to introduce to you Sarish Kasset to share more about the identified solution that we have found. As he makes his way to the podium, I'd like to also draw your attention to your table. If you look on your table, you'll see cards. As Sarish is leading us through his presentation, those cards are for you to write questions, and we are going to do our best during the Q&A time to get through the questions that we receive. So please, as you're listening, if you have questions, write those on the cards. Since we have limited time, we might not get to every question, but put your name on your card so we can follow up with you. If for some reason your question isn't answered tonight, we'll get in touch and try to follow up. All right, without further ado, I'll welcome Sarish Kasset.
Thank you. All right, so before I get started, I did want to thank the Build organization, Councilmember Ellinger, for having me down here to really discuss a topic that's really important to clearly everybody in the room. I'm excited to say that public transit has become something that I've become incredibly invested in over the last few years. Understanding why public transit matters, how it impacts everyday lives, and how we can improve it to make it better and more accessible and more affordable to many people, to everyone. And again, to our friends at Lexington, you know, any public transit agency anywhere in the country had unlimited funds. We'd see buses everywhere. We'd see drivers driving those buses and not having a driver shortage like we do today. We'd see short headways. Buses would arrive every 10 and 15 minutes to pick up passengers and drop them off. But the reality is that that's not the case. Organizations like Lexington, cities that run public transportation have to make decisions as to where do we put public transportation that is going to be the most effective. And ultimately, that does result in gaps, and we've been talking about gaps a few times here today. And I think one solution here is microtransit, something I'll be talking about to fill some of those gaps and make transportation a little bit more, you know, accessible and affordable. And quickly to introduce myself, my name is Sarish Kasset, as I've mentioned. I work for a company called VIA. And what VIA does is we specialize in creating more on-demand, more flexible networks of transportation. And one of our focuses is microtransit, which I'll be chatting about today. But even before we get to microtransit, I think it's really important to talk about, you know, why is public transit important in the first place? There's a lot of data, there's a lot of stories, but I think a few stats that really stood out to me from the American Public Transit Association are a few things I highlighted here. So for every dollar that's invested in public transit, you see $5 of economic returns. For every person that decides not to own a vehicle and instead use public transportation, that person can save up to $13,000 a year. And the cost of ownership of cars, especially through the COVID pandemic and coming out the other end of it, it's skyrocketed. I think you all have seen that with gas prices and maintenance costs and everything else around owning a car. Looking at the real estate market and looking at more economic development, you'll find that home prices on average are 24% higher when they're closer to readily accessible, frequent public transit. And then finally, from the safety standpoint, from a per mile basis, using public transportation is almost 10 times safer than actually getting in your own personal vehicle. And as public transit has evolved, and particularly past the COVID pandemic, there's been this lens that's been put on public transit technology and turning things more digital. And you'll see that with the advent of the rideshare market, with companies like Uber or Lyft coming in and providing, I believe, 8 billion rides in 2021. And if you talk to the CEO of the American Public Transit Association, one of his main priorities, his number one priority, as he said, was let's improve the user experience. And a lot of that has to do with better technology, tracking your buses more easily, being able to get rides more on demand. Now, obviously, ridership is going to be a very large piece of what public transit agencies and cities think about, but that rider experience, what keeps people coming back to public transit is also very important. And underlying all of this is this push towards green, getting vehicles off the road, lowering congestion, lowering greenhouse gases, and also this idea that we have this moment right now, post-pandemic, when a lot of transit agencies across the country have been hit by lower ridership. People stop getting on buses frequently. Maybe it's a moment to kind of change the perception of public transit and introduce new modes of transit that may introduce a new generation to the value of public transit instead of car ownership, and being able to access jobs and healthcare and retail and going to a concert or going to see your friend in a different part of the community. And so a solution here, one of them is microtransit, and this is kind of what I wanted to focus on today. Now, you might be asking, why is VIA qualified to talk about public transit and microtransit in particular? And just to kind of give a sense for, how broad and how kind of mainstream microtransit has become. VIA has about 250 partnerships around the world on microtransit. So we're working with 250 transit agencies and cities to deploy this more on-demand mode of transportation. We've served over 125 million rides over the course of the last 10 years or so that we've been in operation. And we've operated in 40 countries. So microtransit is not a new thing. And it's something that's become more mainstream. It's become more accepted in communities. And I'm excited to share a little more about it today. And I think the first place to start is, how do we define microtransit? What is it actually? And I'll read this out quickly and kind of explain some of what, some context around what it actually is in practice. But microtransit, sometimes called on-demand transit, is public transportation that captures trip requests and groups passengers into shared rides in real time. Mouthful there, right? But I think there's two really important pieces in that statement. Number one, on demand. Rather than microtransit vehicles and a microtransit service, which is a public transit service running on a fixed schedule, like buses do, where buses get to stops at certain times and can hop on and hop off as they arrive. Microtransit's more on demand. So we were talking about the fact that the wheel service, for example, you have to book potentially 24 hours in advance. If you need a ride with microtransit, you can book that right away. And typically your wait time is going to be somewhere below 30 minutes. The other piece of this is public transit. Microtransit is not a separate service. It's not Uber. The idea behind public transit broadly is sharing rides and sharing vehicles. So if you're on a bus, you're sharing with other folks. And with microtransit, it's no different. The idea behind microtransit is that as you're moving from point A to point B to your final destination, that vehicle may also pick up other passengers. And what that does is it takes another car off the road. It lowers the cost for the transit agency in terms of a big metric, cost per passenger, cost per boarding. But it also just provides more efficiency as people are trying to move around more dynamically in the community. Now, some features of microtransit include the fact that anyone can use the service. The wheel service that we spoke about before, it's only for folks that comply or fulfill requirements prescribed by the ADA. With microtransit, it's generally open to the broad population. No matter if you're young, you're a student, you're a high school student, you're getting to a doctor's appointment or a dialysis appointment, you can use a microtransit service. The fleet of vehicles, it's typically constrained to a specific area of the city, what we call a microtransit zone. And anywhere within that zone is where you can get picked up and dropped off to be able to take that the ride to get to your final destination. The wait times are typically quite a bit lower than what you see with fixed routes. The average wait time for VIA services is somewhere between 10 and 25 minutes. So from the time you request that ride, you're likely waiting somewhere between 10 and 25 minutes to get picked up. And generally, there's no restrictions around travel. You can travel to anywhere within that predefined area. And you're usually paying for that ride, and the ride is typically similar to a bus fare. Again, this is public transit. It's not Uber or Lyft, which might surge prices at certain times. You'll be paying $1 if you're paying $1 for the bus. So you'll be paying $2 if the general bus fare is $2. So from our standpoint, this becomes a strong equitability and a strong kind of accessibility factor to make sure that the prices of public transit, microtransit, public transit. And again, unlike buses, you do have to make a reservation to travel. And we'll chat about it in a minute here, how you make that reservation, but it's one of those systems where you do make a booking to get on board. From Lexington and the city's perspective that's deploying microtransit, it's deployed in kind of a standard way. Microtransit is comprised of three main buckets. You need drivers and vehicles. Vehicles first, then you need drivers and operation staff to kind of support that service. And then finally, there's a technology component that turns the service on demand. So building tools that allow riders to book their rides and track their rides and pay for them through a smartphone application. Having a smart dispatching and scheduling software to be able to dynamically route those vehicles. Now, from a transit agency's perspective, I think it's important to note that A lot of times, the transit agency kind of takes care of those first two boxes. The transit agency, provides drivers and operations and support, and a company like VA can come in and just provide software. With other partnerships that we have, a third party can come in and kind of fulfill the entire contract, providing vehicles and drivers, customer service, dispatch, marketing support to engage with the community, everything all in one to provide a microtransit service, what we call turnkey. Now, how is microtransit used? I think there's four really common use cases for microtransit as cities and transit agencies think about, do we need microtransit and why do we need it? First of all, filling gaps where fixed route is limited. We've talked about filling gaps quite a bit today, and I think that's a very large use case, what we call transit deserts. How do we fill those with a more nimble form of transportation? Number two, building first and last mile connections. I think this is really important for, particularly suburban areas and peripheral areas around a network where, there's a growing population and people want to use public transit, but they live really far away from the bus stop. So how do they get there? And in a lot of cases we've heard today, people walk, or they have to use a bike. With microtransit, you can use a shared ride to get to a bus stop and then hop the bus to get to your final destination. So creating better access to public transportation through first and last mile connections. Number three, converting underperforming fixed routes. And I know in Lexington's comprehensive operational analysis, there's routes that are here in the Lexington network that may not be performing as well as Lexington will. Ridership is low, headways are high, and so maybe there's a way to convert an existing bus line into a more on-demand mode and save cost and also make the rider experience better. And then finally, increasing mobility options for seniors and disabled riders. And of course, the Wheels Paratransit operation is an incredible service to be able to service many riders, but there are also seniors that are out there that may not be eligible for the Wheels service. So microtransit can help fill that gap as well. Now, a quick sort of a look at what microtransit can do, and we're looking at option of kind of scenario number three, underperforming fixed route. We're looking at a Hall County, Georgia, where they had a couple of strongly underperforming routes, and they thought, okay, what if we replace this with microtransit? How would this look? And they went through a pilot program where they decided to remove those routes, replace that with automated transit, and you'll quickly see that there was a very strong impact of improving the rider experience and lowering cost. I know these numbers are very small here on the screen, so I'll read them out to you, but from the agency's perspective, the transit agency's perspective, the cost per ride came down by half. So from $25 to $12 per ride. From the rider's experience standpoint, they were typically waiting about 45 minutes for each one of the buses. And with on-demand transit, the average wait time is now 12 minutes. And then finally, instead of the existing ridership with the fixed route that wasn't working as well as the county had hoped, they were actually able to improve transit ridership by 20% in the first 3 months. So really engaging with the community and getting people on board. And like I mentioned, microtransit is becoming more well known. There's mayors, there's city council members, there's county commissioners that are really engaging with this. And I won't read all these quotes, but just suffice to say that this is becoming much more of a focus point for folks that are in leadership in communities all over the world. Improving things like access to jobs, improving things like access to healthcare, and really getting the community invested in public transit. In that comprehensive operational analysis put out by Lexington, I think there's about 16 peer cities that were identified to Lexington, and over half of those have already kind of made the move towards microtransit. Toledo in Ohio is one of them. We recently launched a microtransit program in Toledo to help people connect back to fixed routes. Same thing with Carter in Chattanooga and Des Moines in Iowa. The Ann Arbor Transportation Authority in Ann Arbor, Michigan is releasing an RFP to launch microtransit in the next 2 months. The same thing with the Transit Authority of Northern Kentucky, up north of us. They'll be launching microtransit in the next 6 months as well. So again, peer cities, similar cities to Lexington are launching microtransit and seeing some really great success stories out of it. Now, we've talked a lot about the agency impact, reducing the cost for the agency, filling transit gaps, but I think anybody who works in transit or anybody who's involved in transit really knows that the guiding star, the North Star for anybody in transit is the rider and the rider experience. And how are we actually serving individual people and helping them get access to jobs, access to healthcare, getting to the grocery store when they need to. So what I wanted to quickly pause on is the human element here. And I wanted to share a couple of voices of our riders, people that are riding via microtransit service and how it's kind of impacted their lives. So I'll let this video play here and let you listen.
There's like a happy smile on my face every time when they provide me a.
You don't have to go sit in the bus stop and wait for bus to come pick you up. I can rely on me and it's not a strain on my pocketbook or strain on my stresses. First started to use Via when I first got out of prison and I was going into a halfway house.
I did, it was, I'm retired as an entrepreneur for 30 years. I do, going to McDonald's every day, 7 days a week.
We basically came from India in 2018 December. I was very blessed to utilize the via services that was nice.
$60 to $120 on the average week, I would imagine that said.
It saved me around like 3 times money. I also saved that money and put that into my health insurance and medications.
It wasn't Via, sometimes I just go without, just stay at home, because it's not really an option to spend so much money on rideshare, so.
Then to depend on ride books and knowing that he gets there safely when he needs to get there, and that he knows some of the drivers, he's very assuring to me as his daughter.
I don't have to rely so much on friends and family and other people to get to A to B.
It's very convenient to reach workplace, retire.
Difficult when you get out of prison because it seems like there's a lot stacked against you, especially financially. And in my case, my license was suspended for 6 months. If it wasn't for services like Via, I might not be able to, go to school when I wanted to.
Whoever thought of the idea of bringing in you, this idea to get around.
You know, that we thankful and grateful that we could earn, we could live our lives so easily using the since last 3-4 years. It has been a blessing for us.
So we heard from, 3 of our riders, but if we look across all of the riders across all microtransit services that we operate, the data is there, that we are providing through microtransit, and microtransit can provide more affordable and equitable and reliable transportation. 80% of our riders make less than $50,000 a year. 30% of those riders have some sort of a disability that prevents them potentially from using typical public transit. 60% of our riders use the service to get to work and use it to be able to consistently get to work. I've heard so many stories from riders that, work factory jobs late at night. They get off work at 2 or 3 a.m. There's no other way for them to get home besides hopping on a microtransit vehicle to be able to get back home and then be able to keep the job. So the rider stories are important. I think the rider experience is also important. The idea of how can we make this as easy as possible for community members to use? And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time here talking about how the community actually engages with microtransit. How do they book a ride? How do they board their vehicle? What does the entire process look like? I think the first piece of microtransit is, and really public transit more broadly too, is really engaging the community and helping people understand how the process works. It's not just about running commercials or running ads. It's a lot of different channels to get in front of all different types of people in the community. We do things like TikTok, and we do things like Instagram, and we do things like Facebook to get in front of one part of the population. But on the right-hand side here, you see us at senior centers, at community centers, where people gather and really being in person and one-on-one, showing people how to download an application or make that phone call to book a ride. We also do a lot of just targeted messaging, putting flyers out in the community to be able to let people who are at a community center pick that up, or at a grocery store to better understand how to run the service. So, getting people informed is step one about how to use that service. And now that they're informed, people want to book a ride. How does that actually happen? It can happen in really one of 3 ways. We provide a smartphone application that, microtransit can be booked through a smartphone application, whether you have an Apple device or a Google device. You can download that application, book, pay for, manage your ride, just like an Uber device. Now, for a lot of people that don't have access to a smartphone, can't afford a smartphone, maybe they have a desktop computer at home, or they're at a library where they can do that through a website. And then finally, for people that choose not to use technology, which we understand, people can't afford having these devices, there's always a number to call them. And so again, from a public transit standpoint, and allowing people to be able to access the service no matter who you are or how much money you make, you want to have access to that service. And the ability is there for you to engage with the service through a number of different ways. Now, once you've booked that ride, we think communication, again, is very important. So the technology allows us to really engage with the rider and let the person know how far away is it, how long is it going to take to get there. I know I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and I know when there's, half an inch of snow on the ground, the entire service of public transit and everything else is disrupted. It might be the same for Lexington. And so if service does go down, you can send out notifications to that application and through voice calls to let people know that, hey, there's a disruption in the service. So again, keeping people informed and having really good communication is critical to, again, the success of the good microtransit program. Now, you've booked your ride, you've gotten communication around where that ride's going to show up. The next piece is actually boarding the ride. And microtransit is kind of unique. Just like buses, general fixed route buses, microtransit is, you do end up at a bus stop of sorts to be able to board that vehicle, but those bus stops are what we call virtual bus stops. We, from a microtransit standpoint, you might be asked to walk a short distance to a shared corner to board that vehicle. The reason for this being that you can now aggregate many people that are generally traveling in the same direction onto a shared corner to board the same vehicle and start moving in that direction to their final destination. Now, we do know that there's going to be members of the community that can't make it to that shared corner. There's mobility impairments or other impairments that don't allow them to actually walk to 2 or 3 blocks to that corner. And so the microtransit programs that we build can allow people to also be picked up at their doors. So just depending on your abilities to either access a shared corner or virtual bus stop or get to that shared space or not, microtransit can still be accessible for you. And then the other important thing I think, and I mentioned this before about microtransit, is that there's not fixed routes. Microtransit is not a number of vehicles, circulating in a fixed fashion and sitting at certain stops at certain times. It's a dynamic network. The vehicles that pick you up, they may be going east first and then north next and south right after that next trip. There's a lot of dynamic movement of those vehicles just based on demand patterns and how people are reflecting the rides that they want. And then finally, kind of to wrap up the rider experience, microtransit has been built to be accessible to all. I mentioned this before, it's public transit. Public transit broadly across any city in the country is meant to be and is built to be accessible to as many people as possible. So with microtransit, the vehicles are wheelchair accessible. There's options for people that are unbanked and want to pay in cash or want to pay with a voucher instead and don't have a credit card. If you can't have a smartphone or you don't have a smartphone, you can call them to make a booking. If you have vision impairments, or if you have trouble hearing, the applications and the technology is built to be accessible to people with color blindness, for example. If you don't speak English as your first language, the rider-facing tools and the interface is built to be multilingual. So having available Spanish or French or German, depending on the company or the organization or the city that you're in. And then finally, again, from the communication standpoint, communication is critical for the success of a program like this. If you don't have a smartphone and you can't get push notifications or text messages, we can do automated phone calls, calling your landline, letting you know that your ride's arriving in 5 minutes. So again, accessibility is a big piece of microtransit and public transit broadly, and we've built the system to be accessible to as many people as possible. Now, the next question that always comes up is, okay, microtransit sounds great. How do I actually pay for this? And I think that's a critical part of this conversation too, for Lexington obviously, but just to understand more broadly the community. As you think about funding a microtransit program in any community, it typically comes through 3 buckets. Number one, a lot of organizations, transit agencies, cities that are launching microtransit for the first time rely on grant funding and funding that's coming from the FTA, competitive grants like innovation challenges. A lot of times local MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, have funds set aside like the carbon reduction program or the congestion mitigation and air quality program coming through the IIJA that has funds that are eligible for microtransit. So, getting a pilot program off the ground could be is a process of getting funding for that 1 year, for those 2 years, to really get the community engaged and get a lot of great data about how people are engaging with the microtransit program. And then from there, you think about sustainability. You don't want microtransit to be a 1 year thing or a 2 year thing. You want it to be here to last, to be able to serve passengers for the long term. And that's where formula funding comes in. So the FTA provides formula dollars to transit agencies, and those can be used for microtransit as well. 5307, 5311, 5310 to kind of go into the actual jargon of the public transit. And then finally, once you do have that buy-in from the local population, local community to really support transit, local funding has also played a big part in transit. So whether that's operational dollars from the city, a city levy on taxes, there's a lot of different ways that entities of cities and transit agencies are funded microtransit. And again, this is very small, but you'll see that a lot of different cities that operate microtransit use a combination of all these things. Formula funds, state level grants, federal grants, local funding. public-private partnerships. And putting that all together, you can fund a really robust and interesting and effective microtransit program. A few examples here, with grant writing support, we were able to provide $7.5 million for microtransit through routine and accountable. With earmarks of federal funding through the budget appropriation process, we were able to source $1.3 million from Valdosta, Georgia, to put together a citywide microtransit service. The Salem Skipper and also in Norman, Oklahoma, local universities have bought into local microtransit services to serve their students more effectively as well. And then advertising as another support mechanism for public transit, just getting local companies, local businesses to advertise on these vehicles and kind of making it more of a community effort to put microtransit. Now, a lot of information, funding is very important. I think really the stories that come out of this, and we spoke about a few rider stories, but I'd like to share a few case studies on places where microtransit has really made a true economic and social impact. We heard from a writer in Wilson, North Carolina, in the video that I shared earlier, but the situation in Wilson was that the community or the public transit network had not evolved alongside the community. The routes had been in place for many years. They had not moved to adapt to where businesses were moving to, where communities were building and growing. And now they needed to find a way to support the individuals that didn't have direct access to public transit. Prior to moving over and kind of changing their entire network on demand, only 40% of the population was able to access the fixed route network. Headways were very long. It was a very difficult experience to ride. That decision to move it fully on demand is what allowed 100% of the city to have direct access to public transit. Now, I think what's important again, and we go back to the North Star being the rider, of the microtransit service in Wilson, 57% of the people make less than $25,000 a year. So it's really helping the low income community get access to public transit. 73% of the riders identify as women, which is a much higher percentage than it was prior to the transition to this microtransit. 80% of riders are minorities, and 86% of people do not have access to personal vehicles. So they rely on public transit to get to essential services and get to work on a regular basis. Look at Memphis, Tennessee, not too far from here. This is an interesting situation where MATA, the local transit authority, was able to partner with other local organizations to build a microtransit service that served a number of different populations. The Downtown Memphis Commission, an economic development authority, alongside MATA and alongside the Memphis Medical District, who worked with hospital organizations like St. Jude. They all had separate problems, but they all related to transit. From the medical district standpoint, parking was an issue. The doctors and nurses and patients getting to medical appointments was an issue. From the Economic Development Authority, just people getting to work in a downtown core area of Memphis where there was a lot of jobs, but not great access to public transit. And then finally, from MATA's perspective, there were a lot of very low-income communities kind of close to this area in downtown that needed better public transit support. Routes have been removed, fixed routes have been removed, and so this community was left without good access to groceries, fresh groceries, and access to jobs. And so microtransit was able to become a partnership in Memphis to be able to kind of fulfill all those three needs. And now we look at CODA in Columbus, Ohio. Now, CODA, just like Lexington, if you look at the transit network, it seems pretty robust. It has good coverage if you look at it just on the map and look at the visual. But then when you start to really dial in, you start to realize that some of the routes that were in Columbus and also here in Lexington, they have long headways. The routes are not bi-directional, meaning that they only go on one side of the road and they don't pick up on the sides of the street. And also, it's kind of a hub and spoke system, right? It's a radial system where if you're trying to get to a crosstown location, you likely have to go all the way downtown, transfer from that transfer center, and then move back to another external suburb through that transfer in a different route. And so, from my standpoint, I had an experience with it this morning. Whenever I land at an airport, I look at public transit to get to whatever hotel or location I'm staying in. The drive time would have been 7 minutes, and the public transit time is an hour and a half. And so, thinking through those situations and trying to design systems and public transit and maybe more flexible public transit to alleviate some of those concerns is what CODA has done and what the opportunity might be here in Lexington. And finally, I'm going to leave you here, and I think I'm getting very close to time. But with instead of kind of talking through statistics and talking through what numbers and data that we've seen on services, I think this video from our service, Birmingham Unabandoned, Birmingham, Alabama, is really interesting, and I think it's a really good testimony to the impact that microtransit can have. So I'm going to play this video link here, and we can answer some questions afterwards.
This is the Birmingham on demand microtransit vehicle. This program has been going on for 6 months now in the city of Birmingham in a limited service area. And rides are $1.50 per ride anywhere in the service area. We've had about 15,000 rides over the past 6 months.
Councilman John Gillian, I'm working with Birmingham on demand. They are a very valuable resource, especially for those with mobility issues such as myself. They may get around the city a lot easier, and it's very cost efficient too. How you get to the grocery store, how you get to the doctor, it's how you get to work, and it's only $1.50. I'm Stephen Ward, I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee and the council of District 8. And guess what? I'm riding with on demand.
To be able to ride back and forth to the Max bus station. I also use Max bus and also the Via when I can't get a bus. As you see, it just got through raining and they're convenient alternative. If you can't get the bus, you get Via.
Then the first thing I want to talk about is we've got some politicians that see needs in this city. And we've got counselors that with Darrell Quinn and John Hilliard that seen a need back in December of 19. And they said, hey, we need some better transportation in addition to our good transportation of Max.
Hi, I'm Counselor Crystal Smithman. I'm running with Birmingham on demand. So in order to use the service in Birmingham, all you need is a telephone number and a credit or debit card. We will pick you up at one of our pinpoint locations, and then we will call, so that we can make sure that we're both at the designated location. And then we'll pick you up and then you'll ride in a clean environment to whatever drop-off location, of your choice you chose.
They wish for opportunity, they wish for change. Support that we continue to service or we continue changing as well and making sure more we have an opportunity to anyway the most is hopefully being people everybody and an opportunity to get a job is access to get to that job would be the most critical. So I think it's important.
I find that the impact that it has on the city is enormous. And that's speaking from a driver's perspective, because I meet a lot of the people, and a lot of people are able to access hospitals, jobs. Numerous of people have gained employment, having access just to get to the job, back and forth with vehicles. So they really, really love it.
So I just want to say thank you again for having me here. It's been a pleasure learning more about Lexington and about the transit opportunity. Thank you.
I'm with the Old Church. I live in Central Kentucky Recovery Center on Bull Leaf Road, the good way out on Newtown Pike. I want to share my experiences with Wheels. I took Wheels to Walmart around February of this year. It was very cold outside. When I finished, I went outside close to my pickup time. Wheels did not come on time. So some of the staff called, they got a hold of them and eventually came 4 hours late. Another time, about a month ago, it was warmer, thankfully. I had some money for my check. I used to collect antiques, so I went to the peddler's ball to look around. I bought some books. Then I went to wait on Wheels. The staff again helped me and called 4 to 5 times before they got through to somebody. Finally, at least 2 hours past my pickup time, Wheels arrived. I don't have a way to travel down to Lexington except Wheels really. The closest bus stop is a mile away. In my condition, I can't make that walk every day. I don't want to sound whiny. I'm just telling you the truth of my experience. I hope we can improve things.
I am here to speak on behalf of my friend Lisa. Lisa has recurring problems with transportation. She does not have a personal vehicle and cannot access public transportation. Every time she needs to go to the grocery, to a medical visit, or another essential appointment, she has to pay a neighbor $10, sometimes $20 to get a ride. As a person of low income, she cannot afford $10 a trip. Miss Lisa is raising a grandson who is in his early teens and a great grandson who is a toddler. The younger child has a multitude of medical problems requiring close medical supervision and frequent hospitalizations. The basic problem is that he is a 3-year-old with a colostomy. At times, she has had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital for lack of other transportation. If he is admitted, his grandmother has to stay with him at the hospital. She has no way to get home to do laundry, get a change of clothes, or even check on her household. Miss Lisa uses medical transportation for her own appointments, but often does not have lead time for the child's appointments. For example, he will go for a weight check on Monday and they'll say, bring him back on Wednesday. That's not time enough for her to make arrangements. Microtransit would be a lifesaver for her and her grandchildren. Thank you.
Questions for you? At this time, we're going to open it up for some questions, and I would ask Mr. Reed. And I also had talked to Fred, and Fred said he was willing to talk too. So Fred, if you want to come up now, if you want to come up later, you. Okay. Whatever works for you. I'm just glad that you came, so thank you. So do we have some questions? And that's your cue.
Okay, I'm gonna stay right here next to you and you can just jump up there. Okay. Do via buses or vans have bike racks or another way to take bikes for people who want to use bikes as a part of their day?
Yes, absolutely. We operate in a number of different locations where physical fitness is kind of the core of that community. I can mention locations nearby in the southeast, but one that always comes to mind is ski mounts. We operate a service in Salt Lake City or nearby Salt Lake City in Park City, Utah. And in the winter, people are taking skis. In the summer, people are taking bikes, and all of our vehicles are equipped to kind of take those recreational pieces with them. So bike racks, ski racks, anything.
Alrighty, are there communities that tried on-demand transit and weren't able to continue because of costs? And where would those be in county?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I mentioned this before, and as a lot of communities think about microtransit, they think about it as a pilot. They think about it that, it's not necessarily day one going to be a 10-year service, but we want to put microtransit out there and really understand how are riders going to engage with it, who's going to be riding the service, are enough riders going to be riding a service to make it work. Are there people in the community that would rather have fixed route buses? And so, yes, there have been pilots, and I think, a number, I can maybe name one or two off the top of my head, but generally what we see is that when people run pilots and they get a lot of data, they'll usually take that data, maybe stop the pilot for a short period of time, but then come back with a different revised form of microtransit to make it work. I think that the data gathering curve is really important. I think following the data is important.
Can you comment to the safety of microtransit compared to the current public transit in terms of onboard safety or bus stop crime?
Another great question. So with microtransit, given the fact that many and most microtransit services are funded with federal dollars, so I mentioned kind of those formula funds, 5307, 5311. Microtransit is also governed by the same sort of FTA regulations that, typical public transit buses and paratransit are also governed by. So the drivers of the public or microtransit are also drug and alcohol tested for FTA regulations. We work through incident training, incident reporting with our drivers. We have quick incident response times. So if there is an incident on a vehicle, you can quickly report that, whether that's through the phone number that you have or through the smartphone application that you use to book a ride, and you'll get an immediate response on how to resolve that situation, and it gets escalated as it needs to be. In terms of the virtual bus stops, that's also a really good question, because a lot of folks say that, hey, I like the bus stop where it is, there's a shelter, and it feels safe. Now, one of the things that we work on in microtransit, I'm talking about VA here, but I know this is microtransit broadly. We don't just put virtual bus stops anywhere. We'll work with our partners, we'll work with the city, we'll work with the transit agency to understand what is actually a safe corner for people to wait at for 10, 15, 20 minutes as they wait for the ride. Where is there a sidewalk that's comfortable? If there's seating in that area, maybe we choose that as what we call a whitelist point that allows people to use that virtual bus stop. So I think working closely with our partners, working closely with transit agencies to understand where pickups are going to be safe is a critical part of, again, making sure that microtransit is successful.
Can a client pay with cash? Or are you set up to be able to accept like Cash App or Apple Pay or PayPal?
Yeah, we do accept microtransit again broadly is a variety of payment methods are accepted. That includes cash, for example. In certain locations, I think it's interesting that the transit agency, for example, of the city doesn't want their driver handling a lot of cash, and so they've kind of set up a network of local community organizations like CVS's or Walgreens or local drugstores to be able to pay and buy a voucher for a microtransit driver or a prepaid debit card to use on a microtransit driver. So again, from an accessibility standpoint, if cash is critical to the handling of or to the community in terms of allowing the community to use the microtransit service as effectively as possible, absolutely cash can be accepted. But there's a variety of other payment methods that can also be accepted as well.
If multiple people are picked up by the same van, how can you make sure that you actually make it to your destination on time?
Really good question. Because ultimately, people are saying they need to get to a doctor's appointment. They can't be 20 minutes late to that doctor's appointment because somebody else got picked up and suddenly they're right by each one. So without getting too heavily into the technology behind microtransit, the way that you can book a ride as a rider is either as a depart time. So I need to depart by a certain time, or there's a time that I want to depart on demand. Or you can kind of book a ride as an arrive by time, meaning that I have a doctor's appointment at 1:30, so I need to arrive at the doctor's office by 1:20 or 1:15 to make sure they're in time. And so the system in the background, all the logic that happens, all the algorithms and everything else that you think about when it's a robust software program, it's taking that into account. So now the vehicle and the system know that, yes, I still can pick up Johnny and I can still pick up Mary on the way, but I still got to get Sam to his appointment by 1:20. And that's a hard and fast quick. And so the technology kind of enables that with transportation to make sure that people are ready for their doctor's appointments.
Okay, what about wheelchair-bound riders? People in wheelchairs may or may not qualify for wheels. So if they don't qualify, do you have vans that are wheelchair accessible? And are your staff who drive able to provide assistance with groceries or that sort of thing to get a person in and out?
These are great questions. The answer about are vans wheelchair accessible, number one, absolutely yes. And some of our services, every single vehicle is wheelchair accessible. Other services, our partner chooses that maybe half of the fleet is wheelchair accessible. Either way, any person who requests a ride, whether it's a person that's ambulatory or non-ambulatory, is able to access the service. I think one of the interesting things that happens with microtransit too, and as you think about it relative to wheels, and you mentioned this too, that a lot of people in wheelchairs don't qualify for wheels, they don't qualify for the ADA program. But even for the folks that do qualify for the ADA program, we've seen a lot of people want to take on-demand rides. They don't want to have to schedule it 24 hours in advance. So we've seen a lot of paratransit passengers actually choose microtransit instead. And from Lexington, from the agency's perspective, that ends up being a lower cost ride. So there's some really great sort of shift that happens. I think the second question was a safety point? Groceries, yes. So our drivers, particularly the ones that are going to be operating wheelchair accessible vehicles, know that those passengers will likely need some aid. Not just getting their wheelchair into the vehicle and getting it secured properly, but also getting their belongings into the vehicle as well. And so those drivers in particular actually go through an additional set of training prior to being allowed to operate the wheelchair accessible vehicles. Part of that is, basic training of being able to secure a wheelchair properly and making sure everybody's safe. But part of that's also the customer service one, right? So there's just different needs that people in the community have. If you're in a wheelchair, and you should be empathetic to those needs, and that's part of the training as well.
I understand that finding drivers has been a problem for wheels. How will it be different for VIA?
So drivers for VIA come in all different shapes and forms. One of the things that I think is really important with the VIA and microtransit service more generally is most of the vehicles that operate microtransit are not large buses, not large cutaways. We do have those as well, but the smaller vehicles actually don't require CDL licenses. You think about minivans and Ford Transits, and those don't require you to have that extra certification to be able to drive that vehicle. And by that fact, the pool of applicants to potentially drive for microtransit is quite a bit larger, and people are very interested in driving 40 hours a week for microtransit that don't have a CDL. And so by the ability for us to be able to attract that pool of talent, get them trained, in many cases too, train them to be CDLs in the future, and then have a separate pool of drivers that really know VIA and know the service, and broaden that pool of application, the pool of drivers rather, to a greater degree. So I think that thing is one thing that works out really well in our favor. The other thing that we do, even though they're not CDLs, if you look at VIA's wage rate, we pay generally 2 times minimum wage for our drivers. We do a lot of driver engagement. We want to keep them excited about driving for VIA. We have town halls. We have other incentives for driving, bonuses that you get if you drive a certain amount of hours. So there's a lot of things that some of our TNC friends may not be doing with their drivers that we're able to do and really attract and provide really great jobs driving the VIA service.
Okay. Would this be a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week service?
That frankly just depends on budget. There's services that we operate that are 24/7. A good example is one in Milwaukee in Wisconsin. It's called FlexRide. It's operated by a local not-for-profit. And the main use case for FlexRide is getting people from low-income areas in downtown Milwaukee to jobs that are in areas close by Milwaukee, but not accessible through local public transit. There's large industrial parks, 1,600 employers, 2,000 employers in these areas where they're struggling to retain really good talent because those folks don't have access to consistent transportation. And so this microtransit service is actually able to take them from where they live to the door of the factory to be able to fulfill their shifts and fulfill those consistently too. That operation, the microtransit operation is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's how the shifts work too. You have, first shift workers, you have second shift workers, you have people that are leaving their shifts at 2 or 3 in the morning, and them getting home, safely and quickly is just as important as somebody getting up at 5 o'clock. And so from that standpoint, absolutely, microtransit can be 24/7. In other use cases, I'll give another example in Oklahoma. We just launched a service called Norman On Demand, and the sole purpose of that service is actually extending the hours of public transportation. So the fixed route buses in Norman, they tend to stop operations right around 6 or 7 p.m. And then that's when microtransit comes online. And it covers the entire city and lets people move around very freely during the hours, I believe from about 6 or 7 to midnight during the week. And then on the weekends, given there's university students that are probably out late, it operates till 3 a.m. So there's different ways to configure microtransit depending on the use case and the needs that you.
So will the cost for microtransit come out of the Lexington budget?
Another good question. Kind of going back to what we were talking about before in terms of funding microtransit, there's different, pools of funds that are out there to, fund and put on a very robust and very effective microtransit service. Some of that will be federal funding coming from the FTA grants, state level grants. If you look at the local MPO, they likely have funds that came from the IIJA, the Infrastructure Act, called things like carbon reduction programs and congestion mitigation, air quality programs. Those are all FTA dollars that can come in and also fund microtransit. Lexington also, and any public transit agency also has formula funds that they get on an annual basis. And that means it's a certain share of dollars that comes to all of Kentucky. And based on the number of riderships based on the number of riders that you have in your local system, you get a certain portion of that based on the ridership. And formula funds are another source of funding for microtransit coming from the FTA. Now, federal funding and those funding elements typically come with a match component, meaning that if the federal funds are covering, let's say, 60% of the project costs, the local funding needs to cover the remaining 40%. And that's where Lextran, the city, local organizations, business partners, the EID in Memphis, and the Memphis Medical District, those types of organizations can come in and partner together and really figure out where's the kind of that match funding or the remaining funding coming.
Okay, this last one really isn't a question, but it is a good thought for all of us to keep in mind. And it says, my son is 19 years old and has a disability such that he won't be able to drive himself. He's currently a sophomore at Harvard University. My concern as a mom is that he won't return to Lexington to live and work if Lexington doesn't have modernized, on-time, reliable transit options.
Thank you. And thank you all for those good questions, I think. And let's give a hand before. I think we've all learned a lot, I hope, and I know as watching that video, when it said that saw a need with Bill, I see a need, and that's one reason I wanted to get involved with this. Fred, did you want to speak at this point, or? Sure. Okay, you want to come up? And we'll give Fred a couple minutes. I told Bill when I would do this, I wanted to keep it to a short hour-ish, just because it's an important, but I know you're all time important. I want to recognize Councilmember Gray, who's with the 6th District. Thank you for showing up. She's keeping my seat warm there. Thank you. And everybody who's on Zoom, thank you all for coming. And I really want to thank Fred Combs from, James Brown's in the back. Hey, James, thank you all for coming, or at large. And I gave you a shout out earlier for the affordable housing. I'll do it again because of James. We have that 1%. He's the one that pushed that through, and it's been really good. Thank you. What we did for affordable housing, we can work on with Lextran for public transportation. And Mr. Combs, thank you for being here. And I really appreciate that they're coming here. They see the need. They see how much people in this community are looking for other ways in the 21st century that we can do things. And I just want to thank you for being here and just to come and give a couple words if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Elder. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I am so thankful to see such energy around transportation and public transit. I wanted to start with our mission statement at Lexington, which is we serve people in our community with mobility solutions. Now that's not we serve people with a bus, it's mobility solutions. That's different ways to look at how we can get people to move around the city safely, effectively, and efficiently. Much of the conversation that we've heard today has been about gaps in Lexington service, and in some cases, like with wheels, places that we're falling short. We understand that. We are working every day to try to fill those gaps as best we can. But I do want to say thank you to my coworkers. In the month of September, we would, across our services, produce nearly 400,000 trips in the city. So I know we can't be everywhere for everyone and do, but we do some great work in the community. So I definitely appreciate my coworkers for that. So really, how do we make something like this a reality? You noticed in the agenda, there was a map. that came from our comprehensive operating analysis. And this map started to identify some zones that we thought where micro transit and mobility on demand could work. And as you notice for these zones, there's a fixed route. The fixed route as the backbone of the system to be able to make it a true community-wide transportation network is very important. So the fixed route is a critical piece to making this not just a small neighborhood zone, but a citywide mobility option. To make that happen, we're gonna need vehicles, we're gonna need employees, those operators actually do not need a CDL, that's one thing, to correct, because if anyone out there, if your friends or neighbors are looking for a good career opportunity, reach out to us. Be it with Girls or be it with Lexington, we're always on the look for new employees, new operators. And then the other piece to really think about is how can we support additional transit funding? A comment that was made earlier on, if we were fully funded, you have a bus all over the city, at all the time. Talk to your legislators, ask for more funding at the federal level. Things like this can really become reality. I won't take up too much more time. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and I'll hang around after the event is over to chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Except for private attending to our schedule, we are supposed to be closing up, so I'll keep my comments short. I want to once again thank Bill. Thank you all for having us here. I did take the bus here today, and I spoke to people on the bus. And I want to tell you, it was a full bus. I was pleased to see that. It was a clean bus, and we were almost on time. So we were close to that, but some of the things that we discussed tonight were issues that they were talking about. Kyle, who is coming to UK from Georgetown, he had come for radiation. So he was coming because he had health issues and he had to catch a transfer and go somewhere else. So he had some connection issues. And then I was talking to Marina, who lives over at Malibu Jack, and was taking the 5 with me down to her job that starts at 4:30, that gets off at 1:30. And at 1:30, then she doesn't have service to get back. So that time she has to walk from St. Joe's all the way back to Malibu Jack. So we see some issues that I'm looking forward to working. I know Bill's looking forward to working to make Lexington even a better system, make our public transportation even a better system. But I want to thank you for what you do and what you provide, because it's a necessary service. And with that, I will let you close up for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us tonight and participating in this conversation about the transportation challenges in our community. Tonight, we've heard the stories and struggles of our neighbors, friends, and family members who are often left without options when it comes to transportation. Today's goal was to share these experiences and kickstart a conversation that will lead to action. We want to thank Suresh for being here to shed light on how microtransit can address these issues. Microtransit offers a promising opportunity for our community, and we're determined to make this opportunity a reality for those who need it most. Bill will continue its push for Lexington to implement a microtransit pilot program as a first step towards solving this problem. Whether you're an advocate, policymaker, a service provider, or simply someone who cares about the well-being of our community, your voice and your actions matter. As Build, our next step is to reaffirm our commitment to push for better transportation and continue to build our power to make this a reality at our Community Promise Assembly in November. We call on our public officials here tonight to work with Councilmember Ellinger and Bill to move the solution forward. We urge all of our council members to prioritize microtransit this winter during budget discussions. We also encourage you, our fellow community members and organizations, to join us at our Nehemiah Action on April 30th, where we'll have the opportunity to stand as one, demonstrate our commitment to this issue, and demand better for our community. So as we wrap up our evening, let's keep the stories we've heard in our hearts as a reminder of the urgent need for improved transportation. So thank you again for participating in this summit, and have a wonderful evening.